This is Joseph Carpenter. Today is April the 7th, 2025, and I am interviewing Mr. Mike Caldwell. This interview is taking place at the University of Texas at Arlington and is sponsored by the UTA Department of History and Geography as part of the Texas Veterans Project. Mike is the Assistant Vice President for Communications and Veterans Engagement at the National Medal of Honor Museum in Arlington, Texas. Thank you for agreeing to be interviewed
today, Joe. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Where are you from originally, and tell me a little bit about your growing up.
I was born May 7, 1961 in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. My dad is a retired Army helicopter pilot. Oh. He passed away January 12th, 2025 at the age of 97. So he served in the Navy in World War II, got out of the Navy after the war, got his private pilot's license, and flew crop dusters and that type of thing in Oklahoma, and then joined the Air Force during the Korean War and was enlisted, but as a draftsman at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama. Mm-hmm. And he was working around a lot of officers, mm-hmm. creating their briefing slides back when you had to do it by hand, mm-hmm. and you drew charts. He could do that kind of stuff. And they found out he had a private pilot's license. Huh. So they said, you need to go to flight school. So he applied and went to Randolph Air Force Base in Texas and graduated from flight school as a pilot. So he flew fixed-wing jets and helicopters for the Air Force. He was rated in all three at the same time.
Wow, that's
which
unusual.
Is still rare.
Yeah.
And he believes he was one of the first 100 helicopter pilots in the entire world, because helicopters were just starting to be used during the late 40s, early 50s. Mm-hmm. And ended up in the Korean War flying combat search and rescue, where he also flew distinguished leaders or military leaders from South Korea and North Korea in a safe traffic zone where they would go and have peace talks and that type of thing. But he did have a very important search and rescue mission while he was flying there, and received the Air Medal for that. He then got out of the Air Force after the Korean War because his first wife didn't like the Air Force, and that type of thing. Mm-hmm. And so my dad got out and he moved to Brownsville, Texas, because mm-hmm. he was originally from Crawford, Texas, mm-hmm. and tried farming. Neither the first wife nor the farming worked out. And so he wanted to go back in the Air Force. They wouldn't let him back in. And so he joined the Army, and they let him back in as a warrant officer, and he retired as a CW4 back in the early 70s. Yes, but flew Chinooks in the Vietnam War. So, you talk about heroes and people who really served their country. I grew up with a father who served in 3 different wars and 3 different services.
That's amazing.
And then met my mom in Germany, and they eventually got married in 1960 here in the United States. And I was born in 61 at Fort Sill. And I was only there 10 weeks. I don't, have any memories of that, of course. And then we moved to Fort Richardson in Alaska, where my sister was born. And in 1964, they have a big earthquake there that was very, very devastating to the area. It was one of my earliest childhood memories, seeing the earth do this,
Wow.
There's a willow tree in the front yard, and it would bend all the way over, and the top would touch the ground, and then it would bend all the way back over, and it would just whip like that.
And you remember all this?
I remember that.
How old were you?
I was 3 years old.
Oh, my goodness. That's young.
And then after that assignment, we all moved to a place called Fort Rucker, Alabama. It was called Fort Rucker then. It's in the southeastern corner of the state. I call it the real LA, Lower Alabama. and and that's where I grew up.
That's good.
So we ended up building a house in a small town called Daleville, right outside of the base gate, and I grew up there. I went to the same school for 12 years, same school building, first grade through 12th grade. Small town, very
That's
small
amazing.
town, and also went to high school there. So it was a great place to grow up at the time, and I really enjoyed it. And we had a really good life there.
What sports were you involved in? What other activities were you involved in?
I love all sports. I consider myself a natural non-athlete. I love all sports. I'm terrible at all of them.
Right.
But I mostly played on the golf. I was on the golf team. What I really got into early on was reporting. So I worked on the base newspaper from my 9th grade year through my 12th, my high school newspaper. I'm jumping ahead to the Air Force here, but
Okay.
I worked on my high school newspaper from 9th grade through 12th grade. And I was the editor of my high school newspaper my junior and senior year. So I really enjoyed that, and so I did a lot of sports reporting and a lot of sports photography. And I really wanted to be a sports reporter, sports broadcaster when I grew up. That's what I really wanted to do. Okay. And so that's how I was involved in high school. And also got involved in Army Junior ROTC, where I was the public information officer. Little did I know that experience would help me later on. I really had no intention of joining the military. I just didn't think I was right for it. And but really enjoyed the high school experience because you're involved with everything when you're editing the high school newspaper, and yearbook and that type of thing. And played on the golf team. But I didn't. That was all really, right, because I was just consumed with the other activities there.
Before you joined the Air Force, did you go to college?
I did. I went to what is now called Troy University in Troy, Alabama. It was called Troy State then, and I majored in broadcast journalism. So I had always been interested in broadcasting and thought that was something that I could do. My dream job was to be the what's called the voice of the Tide, the play-by-play announcer for the Alabama Crimson Tide. That was my dream job, or to host the Today Show.
Okay.
I knew I didn't have the talent to do either one after I got into it.
Okay.
But it was a great experience. I remember reporting into the journalism school, and I went straight to the television station to see, hey, what do you need? What can I do? They said, well, we need a sports director. I said, okay, and we'll pay you $10 a week. You don't have to pay me anything. I'll pay you. No, right. We have to pay you. I said, okay. And so I got to be the sports director, and had a group of reporters that worked with me, and I signed the stories. I did the sports on our college campus television station most every night, and that type of thing. So it was a lot of great experience. Had a great time doing it. Yeah. I remember one of my first shooting assignments was a baseball game between Troy and Auburn. And Auburn had this guy named Bo Jackson. Maybe you've heard of him.
Yeah.
And first of all, yeah, great. I'm going to go out and shoot a baseball game, and Bo Jackson's playing. And you realize very quickly baseball is really, really hard to shoot because the pitcher's here, the catcher's 60 feet, 6 inches away. You've got to follow all this action, and they're running around 90 feet races and that type of thing. So it was a pretty big challenge first time out just shooting that kind of stuff. And you learn a lot very quickly. And then the pitcher struck out Bo his first time up. So that was kind of cool. And everybody went wild.
Do we know who that pitcher was?
I don't remember who the pitcher was. I don't.
Is one Nolan
Sorry.
Ryan or
Was it?
something?
No, I think that might be. He may be telling this story too to someone. I struck out Bo Jackson.
Right.
So, not many did.
Apparently
as I
not.
recall.
Yeah.
But that was a great experience, and really, that experience at Troy, especially in the television station, because it's practical experience. You know, you can learn all you want out of a textbook, and they can teach you how to write and all that. But just having the experience of reporting stories and then editing stories, writing them up, introducing them on the news. That's a great practical experience is what you need really for that job. And that enabled me to get my first television job right out of college.
Wow.
Which, was really kind of hard to do, but it was a very small station in Valdosta, Georgia called WVGA. It was an ABC affiliate, Channel 44. Very woefully underfunded. And challenging management that was based far, far away. And so, our antenna, our broadcasting antenna, was bought off the Empire State Building. It had been used by a Spanish television station, and that station went defunct, and so they got this broadcast antenna off the Empire State Building, a very low price, and we had to microwave it out to some field out in Lowndes County, Georgia. and sometimes it was up and sometimes it was down, but that was back in the mid 80s, 1984, 83, 84 time frame. But that was a great experience because there were two reporters, and the two reporters were also the two news anchors. So we are out scrambling all day long to get video that you could use on the air and fill time, 22 minutes of news. Actually, it's about 16, 2 8-minute blocks. And then you have to come back, edit those stories, write them up, and be fresh on the news to anchor.
Right.
So it was a scramble each and every day, but you just learn how to write. That's where I learned how to write, because you'd get in the car and you'd have 20 minutes to drive to the station. You wrote the whole story in your head in 20 minutes. You wrote it out. You knew what sound bites you wanted to use, and you saved a lot of time that way. You just had to learn to do that to be able to get everything ready for the newscast. So while it was woefully underfunded, I called it the Ranger School of Television News because I did everything. I mean, in 1983 and 1984, electronic news gathering was not this.
Right.
It was a big camera that you had on your shoulder or on a big tripod, and we used 3/4-inch videotape. Now, 3/4-inch videotape's about this thick, and the tape itself, the cassette, was about this long and about that thick. And the deck you had to record it on, portable deck, was like this, and you've got a strap around your shoulder, and it's on your head. It's huge
portable
thing.
Yes.
That's portable.
Yes.
And you've got a light bag and a camera bag, and everything's corded and connected. So you had to figure all that out. And what was also just kind of a blessing in disguise and very fortuitous, Valdosta, Georgia is right next to Moody Air Force Base. And when we were starting the newscast, because we started this newscast from scratch, they said, okay, who's going to cover what? What beats? And I said, I'm a military brat, I'll take the Air Force. Well, in the process of doing that, the public affairs officer and I became very good friends.
See.
And I would go out to the base 2-3 times a week and do stories out of the base. They were a great source of stories, great people to interview. And he and I became very good friends. His name is Lieutenant Colonel Nino Fabiano. He's this gorgeous French-Italian guy that everybody loved. The women loved him and the men wanted to be like him, you know. So, and just a nice guy. And we became great friends through this process. And it was August of 1984, and I was going out to the base to do a story. And I get out there, and I'm in a jacket and tie, long sleeve shirt. It's August of 1984 in south central Georgia. Right. So it's about 98 degrees and about 95% humidity. And I've got all this equipment that I described earlier that I'm lugging up there. I'm sweating like a pig. Right. He walks out of his office like he just got off of GQ magazine. Right. And I looked up at him and I said, "How do I do what you do?" And so we had a little time. I set everything down. We talked in his office for a while, and he explained the process. And part of that process, it's a big application process. And part of that process is taking an exam called the Air Force Officers Qualification Test. AFOQT is the acronym. You learn in the Air Force everything has an
Everything's an acronym.
So I had to take, it's kind of like a GRE. And there's a book about this thick, like a GRE that you study. And it's broken up into different sections. Pilot and navigator, math and science, and then I think it's language and English and like reading comprehension or these word association things. So it's that type of thing. So I study for the test, and I'm doing all the other application stuff that you have to do. And I'm studying for the test. Take it. You go somewhere to take it and get the results back. And I did horribly on the test. I mean, just horrible. Right. You know, and I'm like, well, I guess this is not going to work out. So it's December of 1984, and I changed stations. And I moved to WDHN, Channel 18 in Dothan, Alabama, pretty close to where I grew up. I mean, right within 25 miles of where I grew up. And same management company, though, but it's a little more organized and established station with news team and all of that, and just a better situation all the way around. And my plan was, you know, at some point to work into sports, being a sports reporter, sports anchor, still that dream of being the voice of the tide, right? And getting into all that. And I put the Air Force behind me. And in late April, Nino calls me and says, "Mike, you still interested in joining the Air Force?" And I said, "Well, yeah, but you saw my test score. I mean, they were terrible. I got no chance." And he says, "Well, do you remember Lieutenant Colonel," and I'm going to call him Smith because I don't really want to use his real name. Okay. And I said, "Yeah, I remember him. I had interviewed him 3-4 times at Moody." He says, "Well, he's now the recruiting squadron commander for the state of Alabama. You have an appointment," this is on a Monday, "you have an appointment with him on Wednesday at 9 o'clock in the morning at Gunner Air Force Station in Montgomery. It's about an hour and a half away. Be there." And I go, "Okay, I'll be there." I have no idea what's about to happen. I get the day off. I drive up to Montgomery to Gunner Air Force Station. And I meet with him. We remember each other and reminisce about some of the stories we did. And he goes, "Well, here's the situation. President Reagan wants to build up the military, and we need a lot of non-technical people right now. So let's take a look at your scores. And I said, well, that's going to be a problem. And remember what I said, it's different sections. There's a pilot navigator section. Well, you're not going to be a pilot or navigator. Throw that out. That leaves math and science, like engineering, that kind of. You're not going to be an engineer. You're not going to, do those types of things, go into medical. Throw that out. I said, well, that leaves the English and the language part. As I recall, I didn't do all that strongly on that either. And he said, yeah, I know that, but I've seen your work. I've seen what you can do. I think you'd be good in the Air Force. I'm taking your file and a couple others with me to San Antonio to our personnel center at Randolph Air Force Base, and I'll see what we can do. 2 weeks later, I was at officer training school.
Wow.
Yeah,
that was quick.
May 21st of 1985, I was at officer training school.
So this is after you'd graduated from college,
Right.
and you'd had a job for now, what?
A year and a half.
Year and a half.
Year and a half doing television news.
How did you feel about that transition that quickly?
Totally blessed, and totally. I knew what the military could do for you as a way of life. I saw it with my dad grew up in Crawford. Well, he was born in Crawford, Texas, but he grew up in Oklahoma, around Oklahoma City, and they were dirt poor. I mean, his father was kind of a wildcatter out there and supported oil field work and that type of thing. I mean, he was one of those guys that didn't have shoes until he was 7 years old, So I saw what it did for him and our family. And I said, okay, if I can get in and if I can get through officer training school, I knew then and there, I want to do this for 20 years.
Wow.
I made that decision then. And as a matter of fact, I was 24 years old when I went into the Air Force. At 1985, I was 24 years old. So I was older than most people going in. I said, really, if I could make it for 26 years until I'm 50 and retire as a lieutenant colonel, I'll be very, very happy. That'd be a great career. I didn't quite make it. I did 24 years, but I did retire as a colonel, so it kind of balances.
It worked out. Yeah.
So, but and I was able to go in as a public affairs officer, like my good friend Nino, and just start of a great adventure that I never knew I would ever have in my life, but. I have to thank the good Lord in heaven because he opened so many doors.
So when you went to training, you said you're a little bit older than maybe your classmates were. You obviously had more work experience than some of your classmates had. How did that go for you? Did it automatically move you into a leadership type position?
No, it didn't. It was tough to assimilate into that environment when it was totally foreign to what you had been doing before, where, as a broadcaster, you're kind of on your own, in your own time, your own way. And, the common thing is you got to be savvy, but in the Air Force, you got to be savvy within a set of parameters that are really hard. So It took a little while to assimilate into that. But really at about halfway through, it started clicking for me. Academically, physically, culturally, where, you just have to find the confidence within yourself that you can get through this. In officer training school back then, it wasn't, they're not going to yell at you or anything. I mean, it was pretty much a gentleman's course. I don't think it's like that anymore. And I know it's not like that in the other services.
Right.
But, it was still very demanding not each item per se, but all of it together is very demanding. And so you have to know how to manage your time. And that's the one thing I really had to learn. And it took a few weeks, and it took a failure or two, frankly. So I remember early on, we're taking a test, and I don't really recall what the test was on. I think it was on some regulations or something like that. But in OTS, a passing grade is 80. 80 and above is passing grade. And your average, it mattered somewhat, but you had to make an 80, right? And so I recall the one test I took, I got it back, and you don't score your own test. Somebody else scores it, and you're scoring someone else's. And you go through that, and then you turn it in, and then they hand it back to you with your grade on it, and I made it 80. I go, oh, great, I made it 80. And they're going through the test. Here's the answer to this question, here's the answer to this question. And I realized at that point that the person grading my test made a mistake and counted one right that was actually wrong. Oh. So you're all of a sudden confronted with a dilemma. Here you are struggling in the program to begin with, and now you've just failed the test. They didn't catch it, but I did.
Right.
So there's this thing called the honor code.
Right.
I will not lie, cheat, or steal.
Right.
Tolerate those who do. And so I called the foul on myself, and I said, I went up, and I said, this was counted right. It's actually wrong, so it needs to be marked down to 75. He goes, the flight commander, who's a captain, and you think he's God because he's a captain.
Right, yeah.
Looks at me and goes, you do realize this means you've failed the test? I go, yes, sir, I do realize that. He said, well, thank you for your integrity. You're going to have to make it up, whatever. And so, from that point on, I kind of got, something happened and things started turning around. And I did much better. I just got more focused on what you have to do, and but you go through a little failure like that, right. and you have a reality check, like, if you don't make this work, it's going to be hard to go back to broadcasting and get another job, because it was just a weird industry at the time. It was changing to more like what it is now, where everybody's under big contracts and that kind of thing. It would have been very difficult.
Once you get out, trying to get back in.
Get back into it.
Yeah.
And so I just really learned from that experience and took it on. By the way, I want to go back to high school a little bit, and when I was that high school newspaper staff and then editor, we had the same newspaper faculty advisor for 4 years. So that person, his name is Jerry Glover, unfortunately passed away several years ago, but became one of my first great mentors. And we had this 3 core values in the Air Force: integrity, service before self, excellence, and all we do. I didn't learn those in the Air Force. I learned those from Jerry Glover on that newspaper, day in and day out, as he, coached you into doing the right things all the time, And so I was always very grateful for that.
Tell me a little bit about your mother. We kind of skipped. I know we went back to high school. Let's go back a little bit further. Tell me about your mom.
My mom was born in Germany in November of 1928. So she was relatively, into her teens when World War II started. So she was the youngest of 8 children, her parents did work. Her two brothers were in the German army. In those days, you had to serve, and they were both killed in action. Not sure. They're not sure how, but they went off to war and never came home. And so she had 5 other sisters, and it was a difficult time then.
Yes.
As it turns out, they somehow, her father's German, German. Her mother happened to be half Jewish. And somehow she was able to avoid, being taken away. And they never figured out that, she was using the Wagner name, not the Hyman name.
Right.
And so they survived all that.
Wow.
Her mother did, and they. It was a prisoner of war camp where they grew up, a little town called Heppenheim, a little winemaking town just south of Frankfurt, about 30, 40 miles. It's a beautiful town. I go back about every other year because it's so pretty, and I have a lot of German relatives still. So we still go back, and the Americans did not bomb that town because there's a prisoner of war camp very close by, and they didn't want anybody being killed that wasn't supposed to be killed, or that type of thing. But my mom, unfortunately, passed away March 2nd of 2024. So she was 95.
Goodness.
So my parents were, mom was 95, dad was 97.
Right.
And
not too far apart.
And not too far apart
their
from
deaths
each other.
were
Right.
too far
It's
apart.
less, 10 months or so apart. So, it's interesting to know someone all your life for 63 years, and then all of a sudden, within a 10-month spot, they're gone.
Yeah.
And it's, there's. I think I'll pick up the phone and call them. Well, you can't call them.
Right.
So, but they taught us a lot of great things, and you move on. And
how did they meet?
Yeah. So, my mom spoke very good English. So she learned English in school and spoke very good English, and she was a very outgoing person. She would have been a great public affairs officer in the Air Force.
Right.
My dad, who was not a very outgoing person, he was an introvert, but a great pilot, he was stationed in Germany. She worked for one of the German breweries and would be in and out of officers' clubs, making sure they had the product fully stocked, and was introducing the product to the folks in the officers' club.
So she was like a manufacturer's rep.
She was like a manufacturer's rep.
Yeah.
And did tours of the brewery and that type of thing. And so my mom tells the story that she saw him in the officers' club and said to one of her friends, "That's the man I'm going to marry." And then she didn't see him again for a year or something.
Oh,
and then
goodness.
somebody put them together on a date. And she was right. So they met because she was a brewery rep and my dad liked to drink beer. So that's why they met. And,
Right.
And so it was a perfect match.
Yeah.
But,
apparently.
Yeah, apparently. And so they got married, and she came over to the United States in 1960. She had $100 in her purse. And to meet back up with my dad and get married, she came over on the USS United States, which they just sunk in Mobile Bay.
Oh, they
off
did.
the coast of Alabama, oddly enough, to make it a fishing. It's a route for fish, now. But she did that, and just kind of left home and didn't go back until about 1980.
How many siblings did you have?
I have a sister,
Just one sister.
Yeah. So I have a half brother. From my dad's previous marriage, I have a half brother and half sister, and then my sister with mom and dad. She's a younger sister.
What does she do?
She is a counselor. She's an addiction counselor at the Marine Corps base in Yuma, Arizona.
Very good.
She works for the Marines,
Right.
Not as a civilian employee. And one story from college, and I'm not doing this to pat myself on the back, but it's, when you go into broadcasting and you have, there's some people you can just look at and say, all right, that person's going to be on a network or major regional television or something. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way, but you think that. I was not one of those people. So I remember really the first time I thought, okay, maybe I can really do this. And I'm at the Troy State news station, and I'm actually not doing a sports story. I'm going to talk to the theater director about the upcoming spring play called Guys and Dolls. And it's a big musical, and complicated stage production and scenery and all of that. And I'm packing up to go over there, and I notice our station director, Mr. Jerry Clower, says, hey, I'm going to go over with you, which is highly unusual. He usually just let the reporters go out and report. It's their job to go learn. I'm going to come with you. Okay, great. And we're walking over, and he says, the reason why I'm coming with you is this guy can be a little overbearing. And I just don't want you to be intimidated by him or anything like that. And this is going to be really easy for you if you just be cool. You're going to start the interview, and he's going to take the microphone out of your hand, and he's just going to start talking. And he's going to talk for 5, 6, 7 minutes about Guys and Dolls and how great it is and how great of a production it's going to be and all that. And then he's going to hand the microphone back to you. And you'll be done. I said, and I'm just going to run the camera for you. And so we get in there, we're set up on the stage, and I say, thank you for being with us today. And before I could say anything else, he takes the microphone out of my hand, just as Mr. Clower said he would, and he starts talking. And for 7 minutes, he's talking, and he's talking about this extravaganza and who all he's got in the play and how great it's going to be. And he is a bit overbearing and loud and theater loud. And he hands the microphone back to me and says, do you have anything you want to ask me? I really doubt you do. I said, well, I just have one question.
Right.
What's your favorite line from Guys and Dolls? He looked at me, and he paused, and he looked at me. He said, I've drawn a total blank with your question because nobody's ever asked me a question before. I want to shake your hand. I said, okay, maybe I can do this.
Maybe you've arrived.
We pack up. We're hauling all this stuff back to the station. Mr. Clower looks at me and says, well, that was pretty good. Not bad.
You're right.
Not bad, Caldwell.
Right.
So that's when I thought, maybe I can do this, and really started enjoying that part of, just the whole part of telling a story,
Right.
which became very important later in my career in the Air Force.
So getting back to your Air Force career, what was your first duty station out of training?
So It was in downtown Chicago. So where's the Air Force Base in Chicago? There isn't one. But I became a public affairs officer, and we had this regional public affairs office in downtown Chicago. We also had one in New York City. New York City handled New York kind of stage, the theater, and book publishing, because that was huge back in the mid-'80s, and New York media. Chicago handled, it was more of a community relations effort, where we operated something called the National Civic Outreach Program in the Midwest and the Southeast, where you took general officers to these places. They did like a Rotary Club speech and media, just raise awareness for the Air Force. And then we had one in LA, which of course did the motion picture industry. So I went, first assignment, to downtown Chicago. And it's interesting because they had never, I'm a second lieutenant, right? So they had never put a second lieutenant in any of these regional offices before. But they were drawing down people and drawing down places in the Air Force. So they needed the more experienced people, the senior captains, the majors, to go elsewhere.
I see.
So they took a risk and said, let's put some second lieutenants in. Who can we do that with? They of course had my background as a broadcaster, and then I had a good friend that I went through officer training school with in the same flight. He was also going to be a public affairs officer, but grew up in Brooklyn. And and so it was between him and me as to where we would go, Brooklyn or Chicago. Well, the director of the New York office said, and he was a full colonel, said, well, I want the person interviewed first before I accept him. So our assignments person at the time, Major House Marcola, who retired as a colonel, and he still lives in San Antonio today, did the interview with my friend Vince Hulbert, who wanted to go back to New York City. I didn't care. I didn't want to go either place, but I didn't care. Send me either place. So Vince did the interview. Vince, had he stayed in the Air Force, would have been a general officer. He was that good. Blew Major Smarcola away, now Colonel Smarcola, and he ended up going to New York, and I went to Chicago. So
interesting.
Here is this young kid, still really not very savvy to the world, hasn't seen much outside of southeast Alabama and south central Georgia.
Right.
And I remember first time driving into Chicago, and I'm like, you see the skyline from 25, 30 miles away. It's that big. I said, I got to drive into that? And,
wow.
And lo and behold, Chicago actually happens to be a very easy town to drive in because it's all grid stuff for the most part. So once you figure that out, you got it. But it really became, you don't know things while you're going through them, but the path is made clear later on. Like, oh, that's what you meant.
Right.
This job involved working with general officers and senior civilians. So in the 2.5 years that I was there, I worked most of the Air Force 4-stars, the Secretary of the Air Force, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and a bunch of 1 and 2 stars. By the time I left that job, I was not intimidated
Right.
by the colonel or the general.
Right.
I mean, I knew how to talk to them. You know,
Right.
it was such a, I was comfortable around them.
Yes.
And when you're comfortable around them, they have confidence because you're asking them to do something that's really outside of their comfort zone. They'll go in and fly a fighter jet into 6 enemy aircraft and shoot them all down, but they don't want to talk to one news reporter. Right. With a camera and a microphone. They don't want to do that. So if you can make them feel comfortable and make them understand, hey, you're still in the pilot's seat here. It all depends on how you answer the questions. And you know the information, and you know the message you need to get out. That's what you have to teach them. And they will listen to you because they're smart people and they need advice and counsel. And they know they don't have it. So you learn how to talk to them and respond to them and react. And that paid great dividends later in my career. But I'll tell you, I met that one great mentor in high school. My second great mentor was my first boss in Chicago. His name is Lieutenant Colonel Harry Sunderland. And my first day in, going to talk to him about reporting in and talking to him about what the mission is, he goes, all right, what I want you to do tomorrow is go up to the O'Hare Air Reserve Facility, and I want you to enroll in Squadron Officer School. So we have this continuing education in the Air Force. For officers, it's called Squadron Officer School, Air Command and Staff College, and Air War College. It's 3 things at 3 different times in your career. As a second lieutenant, you're eligible to take that by correspondence. We called it by correspondence back then. And you had to go enroll, and they send you the books. The books stood this high. I got them all in. I had to go to Air Reserve Facility and pick them up. I put them in my apartment. They're this tall.
Wow.
It's for the whole course that lasts about 10 months.
Yeah.
And then he said, you have 30 days to come back and report to me as to what school you're going to enroll in to get a master's degree. Because you've got time to do it here.
I see.
And you need to get that done so you don't have to worry about it when you're a senior captain and you have to have a master's degree done to make major. You need to get it done now. His thinking was the same with the Squadron Officer School. As soon as you're eligible to take this professional military education, take it. So anytime you're promoted, like you take Squadron Officer School as a company grade officer, lieutenant through captain, as soon as you're selected for promotion to major, you can take Air Command and Staff College, be a correspondence or seminar with a group of people. Some get selected to go in person, but you can still take it via correspondence or seminar. And I always did that. So I always had it out of the way when I came up for promotion. Same thing with the master's degree.
Right.
I was done with the master's degree except for the final adjudication of the thesis when I left to go to U.S. Air Forces in Europe and Germany. So I was basically done with the master's degree when I left Chicago, which meant when all my other Air Force colleagues 8-9 years later are scrambling to get a master's degree in something done before they met the majors board, I'm having a beer in the pub in Germany, and not worrying about that.
So how long were you in Chicago?
I was in Chicago from the fall of 1985 to summer of 1988. So almost 3 years, but not quite.
And were you able to finish your master's degree
I did.
during that
I got
time?
my master's degree finished.
And were you able to finish your...
Absolutely. And so what happens then is everybody, back then in 85, everybody came in as a reserve officer. They called it a reserve officer. So back then there was a reserve and a regular. And They just called it that. No jokes. Just, you're a regular officer. I've been regular for many, many years. So.
Not average, but regular.
Regular. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean.
I do.
And so, because I had, and when you make captain, you automatically become a regular officer.
I see.
However, some first lieutenants can make regular if they have like their master's degree done or squadron officer school in correspondence.
Oh.
I had squadron officer school done and most of my master's degree done by the time I met, 2 years later, by the time I became a first lieutenant, I also was selected for a regular commission. So you're already a little different, you know? And then I was selected as a first lieutenant to attend squadron officer school in person at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama, close to home.
Right.
So this all occurred when I was in Germany, and then I pinned on captain, I got promoted to captain, and then went to squadron officer school. I was selected as a first lieutenant, but I was about to be promoted to captain anyway, and then went to squadron.
So what's the time and grade between first lieutenant and captain?
2 years. So it's 2 years from second lieutenant to first lieutenant, 2 years from first lieutenant to captain.
And then you were a captain, you went to Maxwell.
Yeah.
How long?
That's a 3-month course.
Okay. And how long were you in Germany?
I actually was in Germany for 6 years. So I went to Germany in '88 at Ramstein Air Base in Kaiserslautern, Germany, headquarters for United States Air Forces in Europe. So I started on the headquarters public affairs staff there. And then I did what is called a consecutive overseas tour or assignment to the 36th Fighter Wing at Bitburg Air Base, Germany, where I was the chief of public affairs for the 36th Fighter Wing. So it was 6 straight years. I loved it. A lot of German relatives. The first assignment was with USAFE, U.S. Air Forces in Europe headquarters. My first wife and I had no kids at the time. So, I mean, every weekend you're traveling somewhere. You're going somewhere. And back then, there's no internet. There are no cell phones. When you were off, you were off. They couldn't find you. When you were on leave, you had a leave address, you had a phone number of a hotel, but there's no email to check. You were really on leave. You could detach. So I do want to go back a little bit to 1986 because I think this is important, not only professionally but personally. So 3 days after I graduated from officer training school, I married my first wife, August 24th, 1985, back in Alabama. Go to Chicago, report in. January of 1986, I go to Defense Information School in Fort Benjamin Harrison, Indianapolis, Indiana. It's about a 2.5, 3 hour drive from Chicago to Indianapolis. Easy drive, and that's a 3-month school, and you're there full time for 3 months. It's your training school, and it's defense, meaning all services sent their public affairs officers to this school to get trained. You would be trained holistically on public affairs mission, and then you would break out into your service groups and that type of thing. That's where I met my second wife, who had gotten married on August 24th, 1985 to her first husband.
Is that right?
That's right. So she and I became very good friends, and we were lifelong friends. Ended up she was in England, same time I was in Germany. She and her husband would come down, and we'd all go skiing, the forest would go skiing together and all that. We were just good friends. She's a beautiful lady, very talented person. She went to high school in Burke Burnett High School in Burke Burnett, Texas, just outside of Wichita Falls. Her dad is a retired Air Force Chief Master Sergeant in the medical career field, and was stationed for a long time at Shepherd in Wichita Falls. He retired out of there. He still lives there. Unfortunately, Mom passed away about 12 years ago, right before we got married. So we were friends for a long time, many years.
So when you were in Germany,
Yeah.
this was what period of time?
So it was 1988 to 1994. That was the total time frame.
So during the Gulf War,
Yeah.
you were...
Gulf War, fall of communism.
Oh, right, the Berlin Wall, yes.
The Berlin Wall fell.
You were there for all of that.
All of that, yeah.
What was that like for you?
It was interesting because, Germany and really Western Europe, things were kind of on autopilot as far as the threat is concerned. It was the United States and the Soviet Union, and they had the entire Eastern Bloc, East Germany, Poland, Hungary, Yugoslavia, which got broken up, Czechoslovakia, all that. And we had Western Europe. And if you ask us why we're there, it's to protect Western Europe from Soviet aggression. If you ask a Soviet soldier or a member of the Soviet Air Force why they're there, it's to protect Eastern Europe from American aggression. So everything was kind of on an autopilot. And you had two reasonably equal foes in military power. We would have kicked their butts because of our training and our maintenance and that type of thing. But from sheer numbers and types of aircraft and that type of thing, it was kind of equal. And so when communism fell and the wall fell, and all of these former Soviet states are now becoming independent, and Yugoslavia is splitting up into Croatia and Macedonia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, things got less secure. And the Soviets kept the terrorism out and all of that. We did too. There weren't open borders. And it quickly became less secure, oddly enough. And then, we had Desert Storm. And it was the first round in this whole War on Terror thing.
Right.
It was really the first round. And what was really enlightening about all of that was we had made a decision as a military, as a nation, I should say, national security decision. Many years before that, several years before that, okay, we're not going to fight as separate services, and we're going to fight jointly, which means the military services are force providers. The Air Force is going to give you fighters and bombers and cargo and airlift. The Army is going to give you infantry and armor. The Navy is going to give you battleships and carriers to launch aircraft and Tomahawk missiles. The Marines are going to give you a bunch of badasses that are just going to kick your ass, right? On the littorals on the shore and be the first ones in.
Yes.
And those all go to one combatant commander, and you fight that jointly. So you didn't have this rub anymore. And it really paid off in Desert Storm. It showed the world, okay, as the rest of the world becomes a little less secure, the United States is going to make the game straight. And I think that was a big moment for our country, especially, after Vietnam.
Right, I was going to say. Yeah.
And the shadow of Vietnam. And some of the things we had tried to do militarily before Desert Storm that just didn't go well. This went well from a strategic national security standpoint. It went well. But it was the first salvo in this whole war on terror thing that's still going on today.
Yes.
You know.
Yes. So did you serve in the Gulf?
I did not serve in Desert Storm.
Okay.
I don't wear a Desert Storm hat.
Okay.
Because I didn't get deployed to Desert Storm.
Right. What were your assignments during this time? What were they like for you? And did they differ in any way from what you had been doing prior to Desert Storm?
We were still really still at the headquarters at U.S. Air Forces in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, my role as a young captain didn't change much.
I see.
And if it was changing at the USAFE level, at the leadership level, yeah, focus was put on that because we would provide forces down there. We would deploy forces, and some of our people would get deployed. But they were looking for a few more senior people than me at the time. And so I can't say it really changed much, although that did become a primary focus. You know, that was the first priority, and then everything else came second. Right. That did change.
Where did you go when you left Europe?
I went to Shaw Air Force Base in Sumter, South Carolina. It was the 20th Fighter Wing. It flew F-16s and A-10s. Let me go back to a thing that happened at Ramstein.
Go ahead.
Because it was, I think I was still a first lieutenant when this happened, but it was Flugtag 89, I think. So Flugtag is a German word that means air day. It's an air show.
Mm-hmm.
And we hosted it every year at Ramstein. And as a public affairs officer, I do not like air shows. They're a lot of work, and yes, a lot of people come, but there's a lot of jets flying around doing acrobatics and things like that. It makes me nervous.
Yeah.
In this show, the Italian demonstration team called the Freccia Tricolori, tricolor, was the final act. They were the Italian equivalent of the Air Force Thunderbirds or the Navy Blue Angels. Mm-hmm. And they had this maneuver near the end of the show called the Pierced Heart. So there's a formation flying, they're flying in formation, and the solo pilot flies between the formation.
Mm-hmm.
So, they've practiced it, rehearsed it. It's a difficult maneuver. It didn't work that time, and they crashed into the crowd, killing 70 people. So,
oh my gosh,
as a public affairs officer, and your whole office, then it becomes an international story. Mm-hmm. And I recall, I'm one of the younger guys, so Caldwell, you and the other lieutenants are going to go, young captains are going to go and get on the bus, meet the media at the gate, and bring them to the media center. So that's like a 10-minute ride from the gate to the media center. And what's the media doing when they get on the bus? They're asking you questions, and you don't know anything because they haven't told you, because you're just a dumbass lieutenant, right?
Right.
So I'm like saying, I don't know, and feeling really stupid. And then I finally went in to the media chiefs and our director of public affairs, who's a colonel, and I say, do we have any messaging or talking points we can use? Because they're peppering us with questions, and all we can say is, I don't know. And they go, oh. And they gave us the talking points that they had just gotten approved, and we were able to use those. And that's this tragedy was a situation where I learned, okay, arm your people and know what you need to say. Know what you need to say and arm your people with that and trust them to deliver that message. I learned that lesson from that one incident.
And that creates a challenge because the automatic assumption from the press would be that you're holding back.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And they thought that all along, that we were holding back on how many people were killed and, even what we did with the bodies and that type of thing. So it was a very tough situation. As a young lieutenant and captain, I'm just watching and taking it all in at that point because I'm way below the decision-making level for any of that at the time. Yeah.
How did that experience? You mentioned, for instance, the talking points. How else did that experience change your outlook on your job and how you approach your job?
I saw some very senior people in my business who I had a lot of respect for. Unsure of themselves. In some cases, rightly so. I mean, this was a major disaster.
Yes.
But I think it taught a lot of people that you have to be open in times like these. And I think it changed a lot of things in our business because they thought they could push the media aside and not listen. But, CNN's broadcasting now.
Yes.
There's 24-hour news cycles. Used to be you had it'd take 2 weeks to get something out. Now it's just like that. And so they learned a lot of lessons from that. And we had to change, I think, the way we do business and be a lot more open with the media and actually trust the media to tell a fair story. I think most media reporters want to tell a fair story. And yeah, sometimes they do stupid, rude things like wait till the end of their deadline to call you for a statement and things like that. But they're still trying to tell a fair story for the most part. That's their job. That's what they want to do. That's what I always wanted to do.
So was there anything else in that time? Because that is a very historic time, particularly in our relationship with Europe. What else?
Yeah, what I really, really recall from all of that is how I could see this is not as secure as it used to be. And that would play out years later.
You recognize that at that time?
Recognize that at that time. Because things were starting to happen that never would have happened before, especially in that part of the world.
Yeah.
And they're still dealing with it today. And it's a less secure world now.
Were you then, when it was time?
Not that I'm saying communist Eastern Europe was a good thing.
Understood.
But things are a lot less secure now.
Stability is not necessarily defined as good or evil.
No.
It is just stability.
Stability.
Yeah. Were you happy to leave Europe when you did?
After 6 years, I think it was time. Because it is the United States Air Force. So, I think it's time to get back and see what else is going on. So, from there, I went to Shaw Air Force Base. It was home to the 20th Fighter Wing. Flew F-16s and A-10s. Yes, in that regard, okay, it's a fighter wing. Very tactical operation. Great people, great mission, great community support for the base, all that. Great. It's the true Air Force experience, right? Well, what we call tenant, all bases have tenant units. They're not part of the wing, but they're there, they've got offices, and they serve a function for the Air Force. At Shaw Air Force Base, it was headquarters 9th Air Force, U.S. Central Air Forces, meaning they're responsible for providing all the forces to the Central Command Commander to fight in Southwest Asia. That's
Okay.
what that means.
I see.
So it's 9th Air Force hat, U.S. Central Air Forces combined Joint Force hat. And the commander of that organization is a man named General John Jumper. He was a lieutenant general at the time. General Jumper is actually from Paris, Texas.
Okay.
And his father was also an Air Force general officer. But General Jumper was the best leader I ever worked for anywhere, period. Had vision, had tactical savvy, knew how to rally people and to motivate them, was a tremendous family man, just a good person. Now, you didn't want to get him upset. And as a public affairs officer, you know, I had plenty of opportunities to do that.
Right.
But he was very savvy with my business. It wasn't his favorite thing to do, but he knew he had to do it, and he did it very, very well, and was willing to do it. So I'm the 20th Fighter Wing PA. They have a headquarters building across the street from our headquarters building. I never went over there. There's no need for me to go over there, right? I'm working my own wing, and they have their own public affairs officer. I had heard through the grapevine, and you know, had people talk, and it was a one-person public affairs office that General Jumper wasn't happy with his PAO. I didn't care. I had my hands full with what I was doing.
Right.
And I had a great boss and really loved what I was doing. And General Jumper was going to do a live TV set for one of the local stations in Columbia. He was going to go on live. And that PAO, his PAO, wanted me to play the reporter and do the media training for him. Here, we're going to put you through the Q&A. And one of the big issues during that time frame, so this is mid-90s, right, was females going to these traditionally male schools, like the Citadel, the school where General Jumper graduated from, Virginia Military Institute, places like that. Females had already been going to the academies by that point. But these other schools that were private, not so much, they finally, under pressure, started letting females in. Now it's commonplace, right? So General Jumper is a BMI grad. His wife went to the all-female school that was next to BMI.
Right.
And so I asked the question, and he gave me a brilliant answer based on his own personal experience. And his PAO said, I wouldn't have answered it that way. And I'm like, that's bad advice. I'm thinking to myself. And General Jumper just looks over at me, and I said, sir, I'm going to have to disagree. I hated doing it, but I got to give him trusted advice and counsel, right? So I said, no disrespect, but I disagree. I think it's always great when you can use your own personal experience and you can diffuse a situation in doing so. And that's what I think General Jumper did. And sir, I think you should answer it if you get this question. And I'm 99.9% sure you will. You should answer it exactly the way you just answered it. He goes, okay, thanks. He got the question. He answered it brilliantly. Thought nothing of it. I get a call one day from the Air Combat Command Public Affairs Officer, Colonel Mike Gallagher. At this point, I'm a senior captain at this point. And he said, Mike, we're having trouble with the PAO at 9th Air Force. Are you willing to go across the street and be General Jumper's PAO? I said, sir, I'll do whatever you need me to do. He said, okay. And then it happened. And I started working for the person who I thought was the best leader I've ever worked for in my life.
Right.
And he had me, and this is a one-person shop, and you're not doing a whole lot of media relations, very little community relations, so it's really wartime planning from their perspective and from a public affairs perspective. Where do you put all the PAs you're going to deploy, PAOs you're going to deploy in a wartime situation, and things like how do you get them there and all that. So there's a whole logistics thing you got to learn, and wartime planning and how to write that war plan. I'd never done any of that before. So this is all a learning experience for me. But it's helping me round out my career, really, in a lot of ways. Meanwhile, I'm working for this guy who's about to become the director of operations for the Air Force at a 3-star level, and then eventually the chief of staff. I'm going to get to all of that. So he calls me in his office one day and he says, I need you to research, and there's some books here that I need you to look at, research the old checkered flag program, and give me a report on how it worked. And I need it in about 2 weeks. Can you do that? And I go, of course.
What's the checkered flag?
So it was how forces would deploy from the United States to Europe to specific bases, specific units to specific bases.
Okay.
Not just get them all over there and then figure out.
Right.
It was a planned kind of warfighting deployment. And I did the report about how it all worked. And from that, and I'm not taking credit for anything, but the next thing I knew, he was creating the Air Expeditionary Force for the Air Force. We're going to fly en masse from Shaw Air Force Base to Spangdahlem Air Base or to Riyadh Air Base in Saudi Arabia, and that's going to be your unit's wartime fighting location. It's all organized, and when your order hits, that's where you're going, and you know what you're going to do. Made things so much simpler. And it made it joint, and it helped us in the joint fight as well.
How does a public affairs officer...
Well, I was just telling a story. I told him a story. He took that and then started. He had his own vision.
Okay.
You know, I told him how it worked, how that worked, and then he went. He had some ideas in his head already.
Why did he choose you to do that evaluation
instead of the historian? I don't know.
Right.
Right. But he did. So I have no idea. But I'm grateful that he did.
Yes.
And and so, you know, it was just a lot of little things that we got to do with him, and I remember there then was a new Air Combat Command Director of Public Affairs, Colonel Ron Rand, who became the next great mentor in my life. He came down to visit, and I didn't know he was coming. He knew I didn't know him. He had spent most of his time in the Pacific. I'd spent most of my time in Europe. I didn't know him. I didn't even know he was coming. I go, how does the 9th Air Force PA not know that? Right. They're all focused on their wings and not their numbered air forces. They, you know, is they're kind of a one-off. And but he knew the PA that replaced me pretty well. And so we met, and he wanted a meeting with General Jumper. You know, he asked for a meeting with General Jumper, and you know, the only time I could give him to meet with General Jumper was my performance evaluation time. That's the only time he had. He was that busy. He said, okay, you can have my 15 minutes.
Right.
I'll give him my 15 minutes. We can do the performance evaluation some other time. So they went in to the office. I stayed out in the lobby because the 3-star needs to talk to the 06, right? I mean, and how's things going? Blah blah blah.
Right.
Talk frankly. So it's a 15-minute meeting that lasted 90 minutes. And Colonel Rand then came out of the meeting, the door shut behind him, and he looked at me and went, whew. And it was a great, General Rand, he became a 1-star, retired as a 1-star and director of public affairs for the Air Force, was a brilliant man himself and very public affairs savvy, really knew the trusted council leaders, how to do that. I talked to him about that on a couple of occasions. How do you get there? That respect and that trust that they have in you. How do you get there? So through that, Colonel Rand goes back up to Langley Air Force Base in Norfolk, Virginia, Hampton Roads, Virginia, and I get a call like a week later from his exec. Hey, Colonel Rand wants you to come to Langley and work here at headquarters ACC. Are you willing to do that? And I go, well, yeah, but I have a job and I'm working for General Jumper. And so he goes, well, let me know. And so I finally get that performance evaluation. So I go in and we do the performance evaluation. He goes, you got anything else? I go, yes, sir. ACC called. They want me to come up there to serve on the ACC PA staff. And he looked at me and said, I'm not going anywhere. Lo and behold, like not very much longer later, and I think he wasn't expecting this at all, he got a call to go be the director of operations, running all Air Force ops at the Pentagon. It's a 3-star, and usually from that job you become a 4-star, which he did. And he made that announcement at a staff meeting. He goes, any questions for me? He goes, how do you feel about this? Somebody asked him, how do you feel about this, sir? And he said, I'd rather have my teeth pulled than go back to the Pentagon, but it's whatever. So the meeting's over, everybody's starting to get up. He looks over at me because he sat at the head of the table. I'm kind of I'm not at the table, but I'm on the first row behind he looks over at me and says, you can go now to ACC. I said, okay, sir. And so I went, and it was a great experience. I took my war planning experience and they put me in plans. So I fixed all those plans because I knew what I was doing now.
Right.
And planned a lot of exercises and executed those exercises there.
Now, were you a major by this time?
And then I became a major there.
Okay.
When I got there, I became a major. Yeah. And Colonel Rand did the promotion ceremony. And I, in 98, because of the work that I was doing, and I was the chief of plans, which is not a very sexy job. Nobody wants it.
Right.
And there's not many people who understood it or wanted to even do it. And I'm not sure I really wanted to do it, but I did understand it. And so and somehow became the field grade Public Affairs Officer of the Year for the entire Air Force.
Wow.
In 1998. So I'm like, I don't even know how that happens, especially in the position that I was in. But, I took it. And,
right.
And was very happy. And one of the things that we did, I'm still in this job, and then Colonel Rand goes up to the Pentagon to be the Deputy Director of Public Affairs for the entire Air Force. And within 6 months, he would take over as the Director of Public Affairs. That was the plan. There was a succession plan.
Okay.
And during that time, he put together a team to basically establish the core competencies of Air Force public affairs. So it was always, here's what we do. media relations, community relations, internal information. That's great. You know, throw in bands and broadcasting and
Right.
things like that, combat camera. But why? What's the why? What are we trying to achieve?
Yeah.
And nobody could really ever put their finger on that. So he put a team together, and we all went to San Antonio, to Randolph Air Force Base in San Antonio, and met for a week to define the core competencies of public affairs for the Air Force. I've used one of them a couple of times here. The first one is trusted council of leaders.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is airman morale and readiness. So why do you do this?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you gotta give that commander trusted advice, just like his JAG does, just like his engineer does, just like his director of operations does.
Mm-hmm.
Airman morale and readiness. You got to keep them pumped up and informed and excited about what they're doing. Public trust and support.
Right.
That's critically important for the budget and all that. And then global influence and deterrence. You want to have an impact on what the bad guys will or won't do or are considering. And after all these years in the Air Force for me, 12, 13 years, I finally figured out why we do what we do. And I consider it one of the top 5 things I've done in my professional career to this
Right.
very day.
Yeah.
And, you know,
It's amazing that you could go to 1998.
Right, and not really know why. You know what, and you can perfect your skills or get very technically proficient in those skills of media and community relations and internal information. But, you know, you're doing it because that's what you do. Why?
Yeah.
Well, here's the impact I'm trying to make. And so what does that really mean? Well, that means if I do this news story, which I used to call media relations, well, now it's public trust and support. I'm trying to raise the awareness of the public, get their support for our mission and why it needs to be fun. Oh, by the way, I'm telling stories in that news story about our own airmen. I'm now raising airman morale and readiness through a news story that used to just be geared towards the media. You're not even thinking about the public.
Yes.
But now you've just impacted or had an impact on public trust and support and airman morale and readiness.
And then the public then becomes the dominant purpose over the media.
Over the media.
Even.
Absolutely.
As long as they're telling your story accurately, then you've done your job.
Absolutely. So it was incredible. And a very emotionally moving experience for me, because it's like, I now know why I have this job. And I have preached that every day since.
It gave you a real sense of
It
purpose.
really gives you a sense of purpose, where you fit in. And
So how long were you at
I was there
ACC?
I was there for 4.5 years almost. So mostly as the director of plans for Air Combat Command Public Affairs. But the last year and a half or so, I was moved to what's called the Commander's Action Group. In the headquarters staff, where you're working directly for really the 4-star commander and the 3-star vice commander. And it's a group of subject matter experts that they lean on for their briefing support, strategy, that type of thing, where you're doing the real nug work and you're the intermediary into the ops organizations or the logistics organizations or intel.
Let's see.
I was a speech writer and a command mission briefer. So that's the expertise I brought. And when I got there, the commander was General John Hawley, wonderful man, great leader. And he retired. And guess who becomes the commander of Air Combat Command? General John Jumper. So the first thing he does is he's reported in, basically he hasn't taken command yet, and he's in his base DV lodging. It's a house, and he called the commander's action group over because we're going to be his right hand on all matters. And everybody walks in. For some reason, I'm the last one to walk in. He sees me, and he goes, he hits me in the chest. What the hell are you doing? Well,
and he's
sir,
a 4-star by this time.
4-star. And I'm like, I'm your speechwriter. He goes, oh my God. Okay. And it was great, you know.
Yes.
And he was wonderful to work for in that capacity. Learned a lot about how 4-stars think about what they have to think. Well, I learned what they have to think about, and I learned how they think about it, and the problems that they see, and how they see deeper than what's the problem on the surface. There's second, third, fourth order effects that they can they're just brilliant like that.
How did you transition from plans to being a speechwriter?
Well, you know, those public affairs skills never leave you.
So
really.
they'll just move you around?
Yeah, so what I did, it's interesting because what got me there was when General Hawley was in his last 6, 7, 8 months, he wanted to re-engineer his entire command. He thought it was organized incorrectly, so he went through this huge change management process. About 70% of change management initiatives fail. This one failed as well, but I was in charge of the public affairs portion of it for my command. You know, what are we going to do? What's really involved with public affairs? Part of that was the commander's action group. It's a communication entity, sort of. And so they were part of my team, along with morale, welfare, and recreation, and a few other things. I won't go into all that. So every day, one of the CAG representatives came down to our offices in our big conference room, and we would have these discussions and lay out issues and try to figure out who belongs, who doesn't, what's the mission, what's not. It was determined at the end of the day that the CAG should remain where it is and be directly assigned to the 4-star, and they never would have moved it anyway.
Right.
But you had to go through the process. The guy who was that rep, Lieutenant Colonel Ken Rozelski, basically went back and said, we need to get him on the CAG as a speechwriter. I mean, he called me and said, would you want to do this? And I go, heck yeah, I'd want to do it. I mean, why wouldn't you? And so you have to go through a process, and you have to do an interview and all that kind of stuff, and be voted on by the whole rest of the CAG, actually.
Interesting.
So you have to create a briefing and give it, all that, see how you present. And are you a good representative? Are you, the type of airman they want there?
Right.
And so somehow I made it through that process and got on the CAG.
Right.
And that's, I got to do a lot of great things with General Jumper and
Again.
a little bit again. And then he went on, actually from there, to become the chief of staff. And another general officer came in, General Ed Eberhardt, who was a brilliant officer, and enjoyed working for him as well. And then, no, General Jumper didn't go to be the chief of staff at that point. He went somewhere else to a joint kind of command. And at that point, when I left ACC, then Colonel Rand, who I'd been working for, I had told you he had left a while ago. He had become the director of public affairs at this point, and a brigadier general. and he called me and said, "You're coming up to be the chief of the press desk." So I work now for RAND again, and as the chief of the Air Force press desk, and that was from 2000 to 2002. One significant thing happened in that period. It's called 9/11.
Yes.
And so I was in the Pentagon on September 11th.
Wow.
When the plane hit the building.
What was that like?
Yeah, so it was a very beautiful day. It's kind of like a day we're having today in Arlington. This is, April 7th?
7th, yeah.
2025. And it was a beautiful day. Slight breeze. My office 5C 879. That doesn't mean much to a whole lot of people, but I'm on the 5th floor. The 5 means the 5th floor. The Pentagon is 5 stories high, 5 concentric buildings. You know, it's kind of like a Russian doll set sideways.
Right.
But it's 5 buildings that go out. E ring is the outer building. The A ring is the inner building. So I'm in the middle building, 5C 879. In the middle of all that is a huge courtyard. You could put a 9-hole par 3 golf course in.
Is that
That's
right?
how big it is.
Wow.
So I'm there on the 5th floor. I used to say I work at the highest levels of the Pentagon. And we had our windows open because back then you could open the windows. It was a nice breeze. And I'm the chief of the Air Force press desk. So sitting in front of me is a bank of these small television monitors. And you have all the networks on. You have CNN. Fox is now broadcasting, I believe, at that point. You have a few others. And you know, you see what's going on in New York City, and you're trying to pay attention to your work that you got to do, but you can't because there's this thing going on in New York City. And you know, is it just a bad aviation accident, bad air traffic control, and then it happens again? Like something's strange is going on. One guy said, "We're being attacked." Thought it was a terrorist attack right off the bat. So we're standing there, and I'm standing up. There's a guy next to me. We're looking at what's going on in New York City, and all of a sudden I hear this very loud screeching noise, overpowering screeching noise. Turns out it's the sound of a jet engine flying. And then there's this thud, this loud thud, like you drop a book on a desk. It's a loud thud. And then a boom. Now, and I turn around and I see this big fireball over the buildings in front of us. Remember, we're in the middle building, so there's 2 buildings, and then there's this big fireball. When I talk about it, I still see the outline of the fireball. It's weird. And then the whole building did this. Kadoosh, just like that. Shockwave. Just did a kadoosh. That's what it sounded like, too.
Yeah.
And we had the windows open, so there's a bunch of crap flying through the windows and stuff.
Oh, my gosh.
Said it's time to go. So we all exited orderly, but they sent us out the north side of the Pentagon and wouldn't let us go to the side of the where the crash happened. So we got forced out in the parking lot. But you think you're a lot closer to it at the time than you really are. So I can use this pin or this shirt. Maybe this is better.
Oh, yeah.
I'm basically over here. There's the courtyard I'm talking about.
Yes.
And the plane flew into here. And it penetrated the E ring, flew right through it.
Yes.
Flew right through the D ring, the second building, and lodged itself into the C ring. The same building I work in, but that's where it stopped. And that's how we felt the shockwave, because we're all part of the same building.
Wow.
And all the way across this courtyard over here, kadoosh.
Yeah.
Incredible. And and we were forced out of the Pentagon. My boss had her car parked in my direct supervisor had her car parked in North Parking. They let us get in the car and leave. We ended up going to a Costco to get supplies. I'd never been to a Costco before. I had no idea what it was. And then to her townhouse where her husband and son were. And there were a couple other people with us, and then General Rand ended up there. We're trying to find people. So at this point, the cell phones, they were rudimentary still in 2001. They weren't working. My BlackBerry was the only thing that would work, and I could only email with it. And so somehow we found everybody and accounted for them, but it took several hours. And I then was able to catch the metro back to South Parking where my car was. They actually let me go into the parking lot and get my car and drive the 40 miles home to Stafford, Virginia, so I could be with my wife and kids. But I was back at the Pentagon at 6 the next morning.
I was going to ask you.
And I will never forget this. It's dusk. The building's still on fire. And I wish, you had cell phone cameras back then, but you didn't. And the building's still on fire, and there's this sliver of gray smoke. I will never forget this. This cylinder of gray smoke, very thin, coming straight up, and it makes an abrupt 90-degree turn and snakes across the Pentagon just like that. It was eerie. And you get inside, and everything's just damp, and it smells like burning plastic and steel and wood and concrete, and it's that smell of you smell that, and it's all very damp from the sprinkler systems going off.
When you saw what was happening, when you realized that this was a terrorist attack, that we were under attack, I mean, we shut the skies down, all of that, that's very Air Force centric.
It is.
What did they have you do that day that you came back at 6 in the morning? What was your job?
So, suffice it to say, whatever it is we were working on the morning of September 11th, and I cannot remember what it is.
Right.
But whatever it was didn't matter anymore. And so, first order of business was security of the United States of America. So you shut down air traffic for a week, for one thing, and you're on a very high state of alert all across the country. And again, from a public affairs standpoint, all of this is really being worked White House down.
I see.
Department of Defense. The services were kind of specifically out of it, except for talking about what they were specifically doing in a specific spot. I think it's safe to say now we had fighter jets flying over 24 hours a day, ready to respond. I think more strategically than that is the whole mission of the military turned to the response. And what did the national security apparatus of the United States government want us to do as part of that response? So that's what we focused on going forward.
How much information was trickling down to you about what happened and what was going to happen? How much of that were you being informed of?
It came in, I think what happened, that was an investigation of a different governmental agency, really. So we were getting a lot of that through the news ourselves. I'm sure that was briefed at cabinet level and, national security level where the military is involved. But we didn't get a whole lot of that specifics. That really came through public outlets, just like anybody else.
That's interesting.
After that, it became get ready to go to Southwest Asia, basically, because we're going to go find these guys, and we're going to take them down. And we all saw what happened after that. It became Operation Iraqi Freedom, and then we actually opened bases to support all that in some of the former stands, Kyrgyzstan, for example.
Right.
And we set up operations. Now let's remember how trying Afghanistan was. The Soviets tried to take that down in the 80s and couldn't.
Right.
So here we are back 20 years later, and what are we going to do? And what's our focus going to be? Is it find Osama bin Laden, kill him, go home? Or try to make it a little America? Well, what do? We do what we always do.
Right.
And then there's the Iraqi part of this, which, it was thought that there's a lot of Taliban, and they were, basing out of Iraq in the deserts and out west towards Iran and that type of thing. And so we also took down the Iraqi government and reformed it.
Yes.
As part of all of that. So it became a very far-reaching and all-encompassing effort just because of 9/11.
During this time, so Enduring Freedom, Iraqi Freedom, during that time, were you interfacing with the public at all during that time, or were you doing something else, public affairs related?
So at the outset, from 2000 through summer of 2002, I was still the chief of the press desk. So I'm interfacing with the media mostly.
Okay.
And trying to, we were working media embeds into our units that were going overseas. And we were trying to tell our story in a way that they would want to tell it through what we were doing both strategically and tactically. So our general officers were always available, and then we would get them out to the units that were preparing to deploy. We had to really kind of work around classification sensitivities with all that, because nobody really wanted to say where they were going out of fear for their own families, because they thought there were terrorist cells in the United States that would, I know wing XYZ over here is going to Saudi Arabia. I don't want, they're not going to, as soon as they leave, I'm going to go attack their families because there's nobody there to protect them. So there were all those kinds of issues that were just different than you've ever had to work before.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it got perplexing at times, for sure. And then, in a way, once they're on the ground in Iraq or Afghanistan, because of the media embed program, it became one of the most openly covered conflicts of all time.
Yes.
And it was expected of the military units to accept media reporters.
What was the vetting process like for civilian media?
Yeah, it was. It was really a lot of ways based on what impact does that media outlet have. NBC News and its chief Pentagon reporter or national security reporter is going to have more priority than the reporter, frankly, at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, for example. I mean, it's just the way it is.
Or the reporter back in Alabama at the
at
local
WDHN,
UHF station.
At WDHN Channel 18. I mean, you just have to work those things out.
Yes.
Right? And then sometimes you can only take 5. So who do you take, and can you pool that? You know, can an AP reporter and a photographer provide the words and the images to the rest of the media? You know, that type of thing.
A lot of politics involved in that.
Sure. And then, who's you try to make it work. There were plenty to go around, plenty of units out there. You know.
Right. So, when did or did they ever start calming down?
Yeah, they did. I mean, you
coming
go
back to normal.
You know, you have I hate the phrase "new normal," but that's what you really have.
Yes.
Well, here's normal operations now, and you're continually deploying, and you just get into that routine, and it just becomes the way it is. You know, the thing about that is you start learning that you're really taxing your force, because we're a significantly reduced number of people in the military at this time. You know, and we had been 700,000 people when I joined the Air Force in 1985. We're down to 300,000 people at this point, and now we're going to war.
Yes.
You know, and the other services were going through the same thing. There's less battle. There's less ships. There's less Marines at the beach. You know, that kind of thing. So it was a strain on a lot of people, a lot of PTS because of the strain.
Oh, I can't imagine.
If you're deploying 7-8 times in a 10-year period, you're away from your families, and when you're not deployed, you're training to deploy. You know, that's a strain.
Yes. Were you interacting with other service, public affairs?
On a somewhat regular basis, you do. Yeah. You're always focused on what you've got going on, because that's busy enough. But yes, you do. And as a matter of fact, the former director of Navy Public Affairs just visited the National Medal of Honor Museum on Friday, 3 days ago, and I knew him. I've known him for years, and so I hosted him.
Oh, that's
brought
great.
him in, showed him around,
Yeah.
and his wife, who was a producer for the NBC Pentagon correspondent for many years. So I knew her longer than I had known him.
Wow.
And so they came in and saw the museum. It was great.
Yeah.
They lived up in Maryland, but we're in visiting some family here. So, yeah,
Well, we
you
want-
do that, and you have those relationships.
Yeah. Well, we want to get to the museum.
Yep.
So let's talk about what happened between, say, 2002, 2003, and 2009. What did those years look like for you? Because you're still a major at the time of
Right, that happened. Then shortly before I went in 2002, I did pin on Lieutenant Colonel.
Okay.
And immediately applied for Air War College by correspondence. So, and I got that finished before I was assigned to go to Korea. I went to Korea for a year from 2002 to the summer of 2002 to summer of 2003.
Was that accompanied?
It was. I went unaccompanied.
Okay.
I only
So
wanted
for
to
a
go,
year,
I only
rather-
wanted to go for a year.
Yeah. Okay.
And then I came back in 2004. I mean, summer of 2003. And when you do an unaccompanied tour, they kind of let you, hey, what do you want to do next? And it's based on what's available and what it'll take.
Sure.
Well, at that point, General Jumper was the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. And I said, well, and he has on his commander's action group has a media advisor. It's a public affairs officer that handles all of his media because he's a pretty busy guy with media. I said, I knew his media advisor job was open. I said, I want to be his media advisor. So the commander action group reviewed my record. I didn't know him as a colonel. He himself went on to be a 2-star. Reviewed my record, went into General Jumper and said, you okay with Mike Caldwell being your media advisor? And General Jumper said, yeah. And so I became the media advisor and worked that job for 2 years. So I was, again, doing media relations setup for General Jumper, some speech writing for him. I did a lot of speech writing for him, actually. And it's my third time working for him. And,
right.
And, it was great. I got to go to the Hill a lot and be with him for his congressional testimony, because you're always inundated by the media afterwards, and controlling that environment and that type of thing. So a lot of things you just used all your skills in that job. You got to travel with them and all that. So it's pretty cool, and you like to think you're making a difference and making his life a little easier anyway.
Right.
There was nothing monumental that really happened during that period. I did get selected to. I did have my first deployment to Iraq during that assignment, though, near the end of it, and worked for the Multinational Force Iraq Public Affairs Office. And that's when I made colonel. I was selected for colonel.
So was that one of those rite of passage jobs that you've got to check this box?
Yeah, so I was actually, and I hate to say, I was selected 2 years below the zone.
Oh my goodness!
2 years early, so you're
wow.
You're in the zone.
Yes.
2 years you can be looked at 2 years below the zone for
full colonel.
Well, major, lieutenant colonel, and colonel.
Well, but you were selected 2 years below.
But I was
the zone.
selected 2 years earlier than my class of '85 when I came in the Air Force. Does that make sense? So I was selected 2 years early. A lot of it. It's because I was in that job, and I'm working for the Chief of Staff of the Air Force.
Yes.
I mean, wouldn't have happened.
Right.
Just wouldn't have happened. Doesn't mean I'm better than anybody else. It's just, it's where you are, and, these are not easy jobs, and you have to be right. And if you're not right, you're not going to make that.
Right.
And people are depending on you to be at your best all the time. And so I was very fortunate and very blessed to be a part of that group. It's a very talented organization, and they saw something in me, and I had no idea. I'm sitting in Iraq, and we're at our little headquarters palace, Saddam's old palace, and I'm at my media desk, and my colleague, Brenda Campbell, who went on to be an 06 as well, she answers the phone, and she says, "Yes, he's right here." And I pick up the phone, and it's General Jumper's aide. He says, "Hold on a minute, Mike. General Jumper had called me to tell me I was selected for 06.
The Air Force Chief of Staff.
Chief of Staff, and I'm in Iraq. And he's in Saudi Arabia at the point.
That's amazing.
And on a trip, and said, "We've been through a lot together. I just wanted to call you myself." That meant a lot to me.
Yes, absolutely.
So I was like shocked.
Wow.
And what's cool about it is when you're in an environment like Iraq, you're under General Order Number 1, which means you can't do anything morally bad, like drink a beer.
Right.
No alcohol. Well, we're sharing floor, our office space. It's an big open room. We're sharing it with the State Department. There is no General Order Number 1 in the State Department. And one of their PAs was a former Air Force PA who I knew pretty well. And I got the call, I got it back up, to my desk. I went away. I had to go somewhere for about an hour, hour and a half. There's a bunch of eagles. The colonel rank is shaped like so somebody had printed out eagles on pieces of paper and taped them all over my desk. It's embarrassing. But there's this white styrofoam cup sitting on my desk, and it has this white, I thought it was milk. Who's leaving a glass of milk? It was a beer. The State Department PA left me a beer to drink to celebrate. So I violated.
This is very thoughtful.
I
I bet the statute of limitations is over.
So that was nice. I got back from my deployment, and that job was ending. I then, because I was selected 2 years below the zone, for colonel, they reserve a couple of slots for the below the zoners to go to Air War College at Maxwell Air Force Base. Now, remember, I'd already completed it by correspondence because my mentor, when I was a lieutenant, said, do it as soon as you're selected for promotion. When I was selected for promotion, a lieutenant colonel, I had it done. So that's when I had it done. So I was able to go in person. It was the only service school other than Squadron Officer School I got to go to in person, simply because I got promoted to.
Right.
So I had a great time for a year in Maxwell Air Force Base. My parents were still in Montgomery, Alabama. My parents were still living an hour and a half away in Dothan. So on the weekends, I'd go down and see them. And then on the long weekends, I'd go back up to Virginia to see my family there.
Wow.
And then, Air War College is over, and they send me right back to the Pentagon. That's a year, by the way. They send me right back to the Pentagon to be the Deputy Director of Public Affairs for the Air Force. And I stayed in that position for 3 years and then retired in 2009. A lot of hard, difficult things happened during that time frame. And my bosses, my PA bosses, were not PAs; they were pilots at the time, and so I was really kind of the de facto senior PA because they weren't PA. Now they were very savvy and very intelligent. One went on to be the superintendent of the Air Force Academy and retired as a 3-star. The other went on to be the commander of the Joint Logistics Command. He became a 4-star. So these are all bright people.
Yes.
They don't know the public affairs ramifications to some decisions or issues, like when you mistakenly fly 6 live nuclear weapons on the wing of a B-52 from Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota to Barksdale Air Force Base in Shreveport. That's a bad thing. That's not how you transport live nuclear weapons in this country, not on wings of airplanes. And so things like, it was really major issues like that I was confronted with from start to finish. And it was a very trying time. It was also personally going through a divorce at that time. And so it was very trying. And by the time all that was over and the divorce was final and all that, in 2009, I had a decision to make. I could have gone on. I was selected to be a group commander. And I said, if I do this, I'll have to move. I'll never see my kids again. I just won't ever see them again. It's just the way it was. And so I said...
How old were they at this time?
They range from like junior in high school down to sixth grade.
How many of them?
3.
3.
And I said, I can't put service before self anymore, or one of our values, core values, right? I can't do it anymore, so I said, I got to go. And I retired in 2009. It was a great career. Wonderful career.
How did you feel about retirement?
Yeah, frankly, I was tired. I was just, after that job, I was just tired, and I was emotionally tired. mentally tired. I was physically, I was out of shape. I mean, it was just time. And I've often thought, how do you know when to retire? And people would always say, oh, you'll just know. And then I finally had to come up with a better answer than that. And now what I tell people who are coming to this crossroads, you got to ask yourself 3 questions. Number 1, are you ready to give up your identity? Because that uniform sets you apart from 99% of everyone else in the United States of America.
Right.
And people appreciate what you do. It becomes your identity.
Right.
Are you ready to give that up? Because as soon as you put this on, you're
just one of the crowd.
You're just one of the crowd.
Yeah.
One of the crowd.
Yeah. That's a very astute observation. I never thought of that.
And the second thing I say is there anything you want or need to do in the Air Force that you still want or need to do in the Air Force that the Air Force will let you do? And the third thing I say is, can you still put service before self? It's okay to ask the questions.
Sure.
Because everybody comes to crossroads with everything. So that's okay. But really don't make a decision. I felt like if somebody wanted to ask me how I felt about it, or how do you know, ask yourself those 3 questions. Because that's what I ended up doing. So I've been able to share that.
So 2009, did you know what you were going to do?
Well, it was so busy for me. Somehow, some way, this company called Booz Allen Hamilton, which is a kind of a defense contractor, they provide subject matter experts to different organizations, mostly defense, got my resume. And this was in March of 2009. I didn't retire until July or June of 2009. And then I had 3 months of, not 3 months, 2 months of what we call terminal leave.
Right.
They got my resume. I don't know who from, and they called me and said, we'd like to bring you in for an interview. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to go to the transition assistance programs. They weren't going to let me take a week out to go do that stuff. I mean, I asked and they said no. And so I went to the interview and got the job. And that was in March. And so I didn't have to worry about a job. It wasn't the first thing I would have picked, but I didn't have to worry about it. And they let me wait till the middle of September, all of that, so I could take my kids on a road trip, go with who became my second wife. We went and I just went and decompressed down in the Dominican Republic for a while, and then had a month where I could just sit on the couch and be me, and play a little golf and just decompress. But I went to work I worked for them for 5 years. I didn't think I'd last that long in that job. I loved the client work, client-facing work. I didn't like writing proposals to get more business. That was just not me. And I was kind of getting tired of that, and actually went back to the Air Force as a senior civilian for 11 months. I don't want to talk about that experience at all because it was bad and it sucked, and I never should have done it. You can never go home again, and it was just a bad leadership situation, and I didn't handle things probably the way I should have. Don't get into something for the wrong reasons, where, like, I thought this job, because I became a part of the senior executive service, the civilian equivalent of a general officer. Well, this, with my ego, this is where I should be in my place in life. And so I went into it with the wrong reasons to begin with. Little did I know, I'm 5 years removed from all this. I'm going back to the same job I did that I excelled in, frankly, and was at the top of my game doing it. And I was working for a PA. I wanted to do it with a PA. Turned out that was wrong. Didn't mean you're a good PA or a good person, right? And the whole leadership situation was just really, really bad. And I didn't handle things the way I should have handled them, and a second great failure in my life. It really was.
But they happened.
Probably, it was a fail. I left the job without having a job, which my dad always advised me.
Yes.
Never leave a job without having a job.
Yes.
I left. That's how bad it was.
Yes.
I left the job without having a job. You don't replace the camaraderie you had in the Air Force and that feeling of mission first. We're all in this together.
Yes.
Which is one of the reasons why I did want to go back. But I also wanted to go back because I thought this is the station in my life that I should be in. Mm-hmm. It's the wrong reasons. And you combine that with bad leadership.
Yeah.
And bad leadership, frankly, at the top of the Air Force.
Yeah.
That affects you because you work directly for them. Mm-hmm. And, it was just a bad situation all the way around. And I crashed the plane. I did. And I crashed the plane physically, mentally, and emotionally. I did. I crashed. And so it was a very difficult thing to go through.
Mm-hmm. So this would have been, 2014-ish?
2014 to 20, yeah. I started in November of 2014. This was October of 2015 when I finally said, I'm done. Less than a year. So I'll never, I felt the weight of the world lifted off my shoulders when I gave my notice. And and I had become close with that trusted counsel and advice again, trusted counsel to leaders, close to the Secretary of the Air Force. She called me from her plane when the senior officer announcement came out and said, Mike, what the hell's going on? I thought we had something going on here.
Right.
Because I had become her PA, basically. Mm-hmm. And I said, I can't do it anymore. It's hurting the career field. It's hurting me personally and my family situation. I'm just not doing it anymore. And then, lo and behold, all those years with General Rand, remember him? Mm-hmm. Okay. He had become the president and CEO of this thing called the Congressional Medal of Honor Foundation in Arlington, Texas. Arlington, Virginia.
Arlington, Virginia.
And he and I we were close. We would talk, we would have dinner about once a quarter or so. So I finally called him and said, hey, I need to talk to you. I don't know where to go next. He goes, well, I need some help. And he said, I need a chief operating officer. Can you write me a job description? I said, yeah, sure. So I hang up the phone with him and I get on Google and go, what the hell is a chief operating? I had no idea.
Right.
So I found a job description for chief operating officer, kind of took one of their formats and took the language from this other thing and kind of made it all fit. He says, now I make no promises because, there's an interview process. You got to talk to Medal of Honor recipients and the board. And I go, get it. I got it. This is pro bono. I'm writing you a job description. In February of 2016, he had me come down to St. Petersburg, Florida, because they were having not a board meeting, but it's the top level of the board. I forgot what we call it. And, it's the chairman of the board, the vice chairman.
Like an executive committee or something like that.
Executive council. That's exactly what it is. Thank you. And they were meeting, and that involved and the president of the Congressional Medal of Honor Society, who's a Medal of Honor recipient. You have to be a recipient to be in the Congressional Medal of Honor Society, was there. He interviewed me. The chairman of the board interviewed me. One of the more elder statesmen of the board interviewed me. The treasurer interviewed me, and I was offered a job there. That was on a Friday. It was on a Thursday. He said, when can you start? And I said, Monday. February 1st.
Right.
And so I signed the agreement and went to work for the Congressional Medal of Honor Foundation with General Rand. And one of the reasons why I wanted to go back and do that, I knew with him we were going to do some great things because we always did great things with him. Mm-hmm. He's hard to work for sometimes. He's got some idiosyncrasies, and you know, the paper clips have got to be right. And, all the fonts on the papers got to be the same and all that. Yeah. But you do great things with him, and we did. And and one of the benefits of that is you develop relationships with the living recipients of the Medal of Honor. Yeah. So why does that matter? Mm-hmm. Well, he retired. New president, CEO comes in. Mm-hmm. Starts off pretty well. He doesn't want to move from Tampa to Arlington, Virginia, Northern Virginia. Mm-hmm. Can't say as I blame him. I've been there. I was there 20 years at that point. Right. And it was wearing on me too. He was a retired 2-star Army general. He said, "Let's close the office. We can do all this virtually. You can go live anywhere you want." I said, "Great." So, long story short, we moved to Texas, to Rockwall, Texas. Yeah. Lake Ray Hubbard built a house on a lot overlooking the lake. Not on the lake, but we can see it. Thinking I'm going to do this job for the rest of my life. From my home office overlooking the lake, because you can do it from anywhere. About a year into his tenure, and I've started building this house now, he calls and says, "I'm making some changes. I'm going to take this whole thing in a different direction, and I don't need you anymore."
Wow.
And I said, "Okay." Thanks. Is this immediate, or 2 weeks, or take a week, get all this stuff together and send it back to us? And I said, "Okay, sounds good." Closed my computer, found my wife at Starbucks, because at this point we got married in 2003. Okay. Not 3. We got married in 2013.
Okay.
And told her what's going on. He had been a bit difficult with me leading up to that. I didn't know why. Now I know why.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I did get a severance package from that. But you look at yourself and you go, okay, this is 2 jobs in a row now where it has ended not the way you expected. What's wrong with me? And fortunately, I had some severance pay on this one because they asked me to leave. And I'm like, all right. The blessing on that is you get to wind down a little bit. You get to watch your house being built. Now, you don't know how you're going to pay for it after the severance pay. Right. But you get to watch your house being built. And I'm applying for jobs all over the place. My cousin in Germany turned 70. I got to go to his birthday party, so we went to his birthday party.
That's fun.
If you ever get to go to a German's 70th birthday party in Germany, I highly recommend it.
Okay.
And so the good Lord in heaven does work in amazing ways. And so the money's about to run out. And we're at the birthday party, and my wife... We're not at the birthday party, but we're in Germany. My wife's looking at her phone. And she looks at her phone, and it's October of 2019, and she holds it up. And it's basically the announcement that the National Medal of Honor Museum is moving to Texas. I said, well, that's interesting. And I knew the president and CEO of that foundation because I'd met him in my previous job. And, in the back of my mind, I knew 2 things. I knew they didn't know the recipients of the Medal of Honor. They didn't have a relationship with them. And I knew from meeting him that I really probably didn't want to work for him. Just not the type of personality that I wanted to be a part of. So I kind of didn't really do anything, just let it sit. But the money's about to run out. All of a sudden, I see an Indeed job posting for the chief of staff position for the National Medal of Honor Museum Foundation. Said, okay,
Right,
I'm listening
I get
now.
it. Yeah, right.
Adjust the resume, made it very, I know all the recipient specific and all that kind of stuff. Sent it in. When you apply for a job on Indeed, you don't know if you're ever going to hear anything.
Yes.
2 days later, I got a phone call, and that was 5.5 years ago. And I went to work for this president and CEO. It turned out we worked together pretty well. He's not with us anymore, but he was the person that was responsible for moving the museum location in the first place out of South Carolina to another place. It just so happens it happened to be here. And then he was the president and CEO when he made Charlotte Jones the chairman of the board of the foundation, which, in my opinion, was the most important decision that's been made in the entire history of this 50-year project that couldn't get off the ground anywhere else. She made it happen with her contacts, her fundraising abilities,
Right.
her ability to raise awareness, the credibility that the Jones family brings to a project. Without her, we wouldn't have opened on March 25th, 2025. We'd still be working it.
So chief of staff.
So I was chief of staff for about two and a half years or so. And then when the first CEO left, he was replaced by by our COO, and that was kind of an interim thing. And then Chris Cassidy was hired as president and CEO. So I was still chief of staff when he came on board. I did his transition plan in, and here's all the people you need. I charted out all the people you need to meet, made all those appointments, made sure he met the right people in the city, on the board, the Medal of Honor recipients, all that. And continued to serve as the chief of staff through about 6 months into his tenure. And then I came into him one day and said, "You don't need a chief of staff." He just didn't need one. He could do work himself, and he was here. So there wasn't a whole lot of care and feeding that he agreed. I said, we really need to focus on recipient relationships and the board and board development. So that's what I did after that for about 2 more years. And then went into veteran and military relationships. Now that grand opening is over, I am going to the Griffin Institute, our Leadership Institute, as the director for the Center for the Elevation of Honor. And we're going to stand that up and bring in VIP speakers from across the country, have panel discussions on issues and relate those to the values of the Medal of Honor and try to inspire people with those values to do extraordinary things in their life. That's what we're going to try to do with our center. The other 2 centers in the Griffin Institute have already been stood up for about 1.5 years, and they're working great. This one had not been stood up yet. We're starting to do that really this week.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So your change in position then was driven by your own observations?
It was driven by what I thought the mission needed at the time.
See.
And they agreed. I mean, we didn't have any board organization, really. I mean, we had a board and a pretty high, powerful board, but, there was no structure to it as far as, getting the board presentations ready.
Right.
Even we didn't know who was up for election when, and none of that was codified. So I did all of that, created a system for the board so we could have it organized and we do 3 to 4 meetings a year, which is a lot of meetings for a board meeting and for the board.
Right.
And so it's, constantly focused on, okay, What are the agendas? What are the issues we need to raise at this meeting? How are we going to tell those stories? What are the products we need to do that? And then, okay, who's up for election? Who's not? Who do we need to bring in? And working with all those committees that on the board that help you build a museum and create the exhibits for the museum.
How do you feel that the grand opening went, and was it everything that you expected it to be?
Yeah, I thought it was spectacular. So over the last 6 months or so, really that's a full-time job for some of us. My responsibility was to bring in all the military assets that were involved with the grand opening, which was quite a large amount. So we had we really had 3 different events in one, and they all required the premier musical assets of the United States military. So I was responsible for securing them, getting them here, which is a coordination process it's a very difficult process because these folks very seldom travel outside of Washington, D.C. They serve the president in D.C., the 4 stars in D.C. So I started planning that in June of 2023 with DOD Public Affairs. And then in January of 24, we transitioned from DOD Public Affairs to the Military District of Washington Public Affairs, which actually tactically controls the band. But DOD Public Affairs, through our coordination, made our event a primary or what's the word I'm looking for? A primary event for them to support in 2025. Excellent. A priority
event. Okay.
Priority event for them to support in 2025. So DOD gave us the authority to really request them. And then we bring in a team called Corporate Magic. They did our groundbreaking in 2022. And they put together this event. It's actually, again, 3 events in one. And so my responsibility was getting the Marine Corps Chamber Orchestra, the Band of the Air Force, the Army Herald Trumpets, the Army Strolling Strings, the Navy Jazz Band, Marine Corps Chamber Orchestra, did I say that? And the U.S. Naval Academy Glee Club. Plus, the 3rd Infantry Division Honor Guard, which raised the flag. And they all these musical assets had different roles, very important roles throughout the evening to make this spectacular go. So that was my responsibility. And then you got to get them here.
Yes.
You got to care and feed, feed them and lodge them and make sure they get to the right place at the right time. So it's a very all-encompassing job for grand opening. And several other people had very tough jobs as well, but it was our priority for probably the last 6 months to get it to where it was on March 22nd. And I think it was a really well done event with the ribbon cutting by President Bush, and then our Mission to Inspire Spectacular with the fireworks and drone show that really told the story of the Medal of Honor and why it's important to have a National Medal of Honor Museum, which we've really built for 2 reasons. The first reason is to preserve the legacy of the Medal of Honor, its values of courage and sacrifice, commitment and integrity, citizenship and patriotism, and to preserve the legacies of the 3,528 people who've earned the Medal of Honor, our nation's highest award for valor in combat. We tell their life stories in the museum, and the reason why we do that is because when you learn about them, you realize they're ordinary people just like us.
Absolutely.
Who in a moment of time, courage meets circumstance, and they do something extraordinary. So the second reason why we build the museum is we want everyone who visits to see themselves in some story we're telling and also be inspired to do extraordinary things in their life too. That's the 2 reasons why we built it.
Yeah. Are you able to take a breath yet?
I have tried. I kind of have taken the last week or so and decompressed a little bit. I was still working, but before I transitioned into my new role, I just needed to square a few things away, but also just step back and kind of think about where we've been and where we are, and then then I can think about where we're going.
Right.
I think a lot about this project in a lot of different ways. I think I told you earlier about the core competencies of public affairs, and consider that one of my top 5 things I've done in my career. Being involved with this museum, building this museum is what I call it, is the top thing I've done in my professional career. And I had a great Air Force career. I loved it. I loved almost every minute of it. I think your impact in the Air Force or in the military is really on people, and it's not on everybody, it's on a few. But it's not the things you do, ever, really, because they're not lasting.
Right.
For the most part, they're not lasting. I mean, if you built the F-22, that's probably a lasting legacy or something if you're directly involved with that. But for the most part, it's not. This museum is lasting.
Yes.
It's a legacy that will outlive us.
Yes.
For as long as we have a country. So it's something to be proud of that way. But, I've worked now around the Medal of Honor recipients for about 10 years. And I see what's required of them, what's often demanded of them, what's asked of them. A lot of good-meaning people out there, but there's a lot asked of them. And think about the fact that every time you go out in public, you have to be on, you have to be courteous. I mean, it's simple things, but, there's just a lot asked, and it's a burden on them. They get to do special things, but blessing and curse are two sides of the same coin, right?
Right.
And so
there's a certain amount of celebrity involved.
There is and it's a lot like that.
Yeah.
So this is something we get to give to them. And it's,
I see.
Even though it's not really for them, it's about them. It's for America, but it is theirs, and it's the home for their legacy.
What kind of feedback are you getting from the Medal of Honor recipients about the museum?
We've gotten a lot, very positive feedback. There's always little things.
Sure.
But as far as the concept, what the idea behind how we tell the story, how it looks, and it's dramatic.
It is
when
dramatic.
You go in. It's dramatic. It's dramatic when you walk down the ramp into the building, but when you get up into the exhibition deck, it's just dramatic. And
yes,
they're very pleased. The 31 of the 61 who are living were here, and all saw it.
All of them were.
So, and I think we were able to deliver something that they appreciate and are proud of.
Yes. And having been there, having been your guest, I can vouch for the fact that it's breathtaking.
Yeah.
It is. It's incredible. I want to ask you a couple of things about closing out kind of the military service and and the interview as a whole. What you mentioned some of the projects that you were involved in that you're proud of, but did you receive any medals or citations that maybe are more significant to you than others?
So I guess the thing I'm most personally proud of is being the Field Grade Public Affairs Officer of the Year in 1998.
Yes.
So, you always think about, are you making a difference? What's your contribution? And when you are able to do that, you kind of understand, okay, there's some other people who think you're doing that too. And it's not just you.
Right.
You know, as far as, you know, everybody gets medals.
Yes.
I really cherish some of the moments that I have with people, whether it's General Randigan who's a great historian, taking us around Washington, D.C. at the National Mall at night in the snow, talking to us about the monument. You know, and serving with people in very dangerous situations in which you're getting mortared every day. You know, and the things you go through to just solve problems you think when you first stare at them are impossible. Those are the things that I loved about it.
Right. What reminds you of your military service? Music, sounds, smells. What in the moment will remind you of your military service?
So, I watch a lot of sports. I still love sports, and I do watch a lot of sports. This is going to sound corny. Every time I see an honor guard, it's like,
okay,
yeah, those guys look sharp.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's what it's all about right there. You know, that's representative of America. Because, you know, a lot of people, you'll come up to you and say, thank you for your service. You know, they don't do that when you're wearing this. Unless they know you're retired.
If they know you're wearing the hat.
Or you're wearing the hat or something. And, you know, it's just knowing they're grateful. And I just tell them it was an honor to serve. Because, look, had it been any other time, any other period than 1985, there's no way I would have gotten in to the United States Air Force and an appointment to officer training school.
Right.
There is no way. So I feel very humbled by that, blessed by that, and know what a blessing it was. So never taken that for granted, and I appreciated the opportunity to serve. So more so than the medals. I mean, you know, I got a Legion of Merit that allows me to travel on the parkway.
That's significant.
But, you know, it's just because I'm old. I got one.
You're a survivor.
I was a survivor.
Yeah.
You know,
But so I think this is a question that goes without asking, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Sure.
And that is, would you do it all over again?
Yeah, I would. I'd do it all over again, and I probably would do some things a little differently with myself, and that's believe more in myself and not take so long to get there to believe in myself. And then use that confidence in the right way.
When did that happen for you?
I don't, you know, it's probably not until later in my career, really. I'll tell you when it happened.
Okay.
When I was selected to go and be the Deputy Director of Public Affairs for the Air Force. And while I was a pinned on colonel, but I was a baby colonel. I had just pinned on maybe a month and a half ago. There were plenty of people that were senior colonels to me who probably should have been the Director of Public Affairs. But I knew none of them were going to get that job. I knew I was going to get that job back when I was at Air War College. Nobody told me I was, but I just knew. I thought it was the right time for me. I knew everybody in the career field, everybody. I knew most of the general officers. I knew the Pentagon. That's important. You know, when you get in the Pentagon, they tell you to go to 2C 832. You're like, what the hell does that mean?
Right.
Well, you spend 6 months trying to figure out where you're going. I knew the Pentagon, so I didn't have to figure that out as a colonel, deputy director of public affairs. And I knew enough from that first job in the Air Force in Chicago, learning how to work with general officers, to work with two general officers who weren't public affairs officers, but I knew how to make them listen.
Yeah.
And I knew when to shut up.
Yeah. That's important.
So I would have taken that "you're okay, Mike" a lot sooner, and probably even done more. But I would do it all over again. I will say this though, I'm glad I'm not doing it now, and simply because I wouldn't have had the opportunity that I have had to build the National Medal of Honor Museum.
Yeah.
And that's been an incredible experience.
Yeah.
You know.
So is there anything that you'd like to add that we haven't discussed?
The only thing is, I think we spend a lot of time in our lives and we're blessed by things that happen to us. What are those opportunities where you get to be a blessing? Whether it's using your skill, your talent, your experience, your faith at home with people who need to hear a kind word or something. Look for those, believe in yourself and look for those ways, not just to be blessed, but to also be a blessing to others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very good. Well, thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
agreeing
Enjoyed
to be
speaking with
interviewed.
you, Joe.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for doing this.
This is Joseph Carpenter. Today is the 21st of April, 2025, and I'm continuing my interview with Colonel Mike Caldwell. This interview is taking place on the campus of University of Texas at Arlington. It is sponsored by the UTA Department of History and Geography and is part of the Texas Veterans Project. Thank you for agreeing to continue this interview, sir.
Well, thanks for having me back, Joe. I really appreciate that.
So you had a couple of things that you wanted to add to your interview. And so first of all, I'm going to ask you, tell me about your experience in the Boy Scouts and what that meant to you.
Yes, so I'm going over my childhood with you and realize I left out a very important part of this, because starting about the second grade, I joined the Cub Scouts. And my next door neighbor was in the Cub Scouts. His mother was the den mother.
Oh.
So he asked me to come over, and I got interested and said, okay, I'll join. Since you're in it, I'll join. And so from the age of 7 to about the age of 16, I was in scouting. And that moved into Boy Scouts. We had a very active troop number 30 in Daleville, Alabama.
Okay.
And while we only had about 70, 75 people, about half of us became Eagle Scouts.
Wow.
And so it was kind of expected,
Right.
And you had all these examples of people coming before you. So it was really motivating in that way to try to make the Eagle Scout rank, and was able to do that. I was actually awarded it March 30th, 1976. March 30th is significant because that's my dad's birthday.
Oh, wow.
So, of course, he was there. And so this is April of 2025. So we just celebrated the 49th anniversary of being an Eagle Scout.
Goodness,
and my dad would have been 98 on March 30th. So,
What do you think attributed to that, excuse me, that large percentage of people becoming Eagle Scouts in that troop?
I think, the culture of that troop was, we're always going to have fun, but do great things and do excellent things. We would win awards at all the, what they call camporees, with whatever project we were doing. It was just a culture of, let's get it done right. And let's finish what you start as well. So it was kind of an expectation and it became a cultural thing for us that was going through the troop, that were going through the troop, and you if you got behind, you felt badly, so you caught back up and that type of thing. Ask me how I know that. And so there was always a lot of motivation with the scout leadership, the adult leadership, and then your peers, because you're going to school with them,
right.
and they want you to move along as well.
What did that mean for your future after scouting? What did that mean?
It's one of the few things you can do as a young person, even before you graduate from high school, that you can have on your resume for the rest of your life. And I think what it shows people is that the person can commit to hard, challenging projects, which is what scouting is. It's a lot of fun. With the campouts, and our troop was very active in camping. I felt like I was in the National Guard, 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks in the summer. Right. We really camped out 1 weekend a month.
Wow.
And so you learn a lot of skills that way. But I think it shows that you're willing to stay committed to something over a long period of time to achieve something that really is greater than yourself. And you have a lot of help along the way. You've got the patrols you're leading and serving with and that type of thing. And everybody is helping everybody else. And you're getting a lot of mentorship from the scout leaders as well.
Why was it important for you to come back and tell that part of your story?
Well, I just think if you can encourage people in any way to get involved at a young age like that, in programs that are really positive and mean something, because it teaches you, it's a citizenship and patriotism program is what it is, but it also teaches you some very good life skills, like how to stay committed to something. I don't ask me how to tie a sheep shank today. I would not know how to do that.
Right.
But I still know I still know those first aid skills, and why the country's set up the way it's set up through our citizenship and the nation merit badge and that type of thing. You learn about environmental science, everything. So it really teaches you a lot of great skills to help manage life with, and how to be a gentleman. And now they're teaching girls, young ladies, how to be ladies in scouting, and I think it's great that they're able to get an Eagle Scout badge just like I am. I think that's great, because it's about making you a better citizen for the country.
Right. Well, there's one other question I wanted to ask you about. You talked previously in the last interview, you talked about being the interim director of public affairs for the Air Force.
Yeah.
You were a little bit more than that. Tell me a little bit about that.
I was director of public affairs for the Air Force for an interim period of time, is how I like to say it.
Okay.
So from January through till the beginning of June of 2009, the person that was supposed to come in February actually had a health issue and had to delay several months due to the health issue. So I'm basically the director of I'm the director of public affairs at that point.
Yes.
And that is after coming off basically 2.5 years as being the deputy director of public affairs, and a very challenging period for the Air Force. At that point, our new leadership had settled in, and they had made it fun again, and we were smooth in our operations, and it was a lot of fun to work for them. But it was pretty cool because you start every day at 7:20 in the morning in a meeting with the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, along with the Director of Operations and the JA, the legal person, the Assistant Vice Chief of Staff, and the Deputy Chief of Staff, Director of Operations, Director, and they're all general officers, and you're sitting there as a colonel.
Right.
You're at the table, and you start the meeting because here's what's in the press today. And then 20 minutes later, you walk down, same group, except for the chief of staff, to the Secretary of the Air Force's office, and you do it all over again. So, so it's kind of an interesting experience, you know, just making sure you're keeping them informed and understanding through them what the real issues of the day are and how they're looking at it, you know.
Were there any significant events that occurred?
So I'll recall when President Obama was elected, and actually it was right after his inauguration, he did a press conference, and a CNN reporter asked him, out of the blue, because you could tell he wasn't prepared for the question, are you looking into changing the policy that prevents news media from covering the return of remains from the war on terror? And if you go back and look at this press conference, he fumbles around a little bit and he says, yeah, we're taking a look at that policy. Now, I know who even put the reporter up to that question. It was the CNN Pentagon correspondent, who we all knew very well. But I immediately said, well, I wonder when that's going to start. So the very next day, I get called down to the Chief of Staff's office. The Secretary of the Air Force's office. And I walk in, and it's the Secretary of the Air Force, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, the Assistant Vice Chief of Staff, the legal guy, and a few of the legislative liaison people. And having the Chief of Staff there is a little unusual. And the Secretary asked me, do you know what this is all about? And I said, sir, it's got to be one of two things. What's that, Mike? It's either really, really bad or it's really, really good. Well, it was kind of neither. Right. It was since President George H.W. Bush's time as president, 10 years president, term as president, he had stopped media coverage of the return of remains from our war areas or whatever. He was a little upset with the media about something, and that's why he did it. And it stood. And
I see. Yeah.
Then when President Obama got into office, got asked about it, he decided to change the policy. And what it really is, when our fallen brothers and sisters from the war, or for whatever reason, come back to the United States, come back home, they come back through Dover Air Force Base in Delaware, and it's called a dignified transfer from the airplane to the morgue, and it's a Department of Defense morgue at Dover Air Force Base. And that's where the bodies are prepared for burial and that type of thing. Right. Autopsies are done if needed, and things like that. But it's a dignified transfer. It's a very formal ceremony off the airplane and onto the vehicle where they're taken to the morgue. And that's what was not covered for all those years. Yeah. And that was what was reinstated. So because it's on an Air Force base, now it's a DOD issue, but because it's on an Air Force base, we had the lead for that.
Right.
And so Secretary explained all that, and then he said, well, over to you, Mike. And, this is the last 5-6 months in the Air Force. I was just trying to go out quietly,
Right.
And here we are. So we met with the DOD team regularly. My wife, who was the chief of the Air Force press desk, director of media operations, really kind of led the charge in how the policy was written and changed, and then how we were going to execute that policy.
See.
And lo and behold, the the two public affairs officers at Dover Air Force Base, which is an airlift wing. They fly C-5s mostly, which is the largest cargo aircraft in the world.
Right.
Was led by a first lieutenant and a second lieutenant, so very inexperienced people.
My goodness. Yeah.
So, as it turns out, we were part of that effort to rewrite the policy, and then, you just have to wait to execute it. And it was supposed to go into effect on a day. Well, the night before, there was a plane coming in, and they said, "You're going to do it now." Fortunately, my wife, Colonel Marcella Thompson, was astute enough to already have her team in place and ready to go for the next day. And we went through the alert process for the media. Now, for this to happen, the families of the fallen that are returning all have to agree that the media can cover it. That's part of the policy.
Oh.
And so if there's one person coming off the plane, just, of course, that family has to agree. If there are 7 people coming off the plane, all 7 families have to agree.
Wow.
If one family says no, then it's not. Then it doesn't happen. So, so it actually happened the night before, and it went very, very smoothly and very honorably and respectfully for the people coming off the plane.
Why was it important for the media to be able to cover that?
I think the media really wanted to be able to show the American people what the real sacrifice looks like. That this does take a real sacrifice. And I think they missed being able to tell those stories.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense.
Or telling that part of the story that my fallen brothers and sisters, did get to touch home, and they weren't able to tell that story. And so they are now, and that policy still remains in effect today. But a lot of work to get there, and and Marcella and a few others really led that charge for the Air Force.
Right, and you were honored to implement that.
I was honored to implement that
policy.
Let me be clear. My wife, Marcella, Colonel Thompson, she did the work, and she did the work on this. I was not only busy with that, but several other things that were going on at the time as well.
I'm sure. Talk a little bit about your family. We didn't cover a lot about that. Talk a little bit more about your family.
It's funny how things work out in your life, and how the good Lord in heaven has a hand in all of that. Because my wife and I, Marcella and I, met in January of 1986 at Defense Information School. She was also an Air Force Public Affairs officer. Both married to different people at the time. They were married about 10 years and got a divorce, and my wife and I were married for 20 years, and then divorced in 2007 time frame. Marcella at that point was at the Pentagon, and so we basically got together, and we were always very good friends for this whole time, and then just reconnected, and figured out that we had more than feelings than just being friends.
Right.
And in 2013 we got married. So we had to meld 2 families, and 4 total kids. So there's and now they're all mine. They're all mine.
Sure.
Even Marcella's daughter.
Of course.
So our oldest daughter, Julia, who was born in 1991, so that makes her 34. 34 in December. she's a school teacher in Memphis, Tennessee, and her fiance works as a logistics coordinator for a warehouse company. Kristen, Marcella's daughter, lives in Fate, Texas, which is about 15 minutes from us. She is a nurse and is getting a master's degree in nursing. Her husband is a chiropractor, owns 5 chiropractic clinics in North Texas, 3 in North Texas, 2 in Houston. They met at Penn State University. My daughter Julia is a University of Alabama grad. They met at Penn State, Kristen and Chance, her husband. They have 3 kids. Amaya is 6, and already a nationally ranked gymnast at the age of 6.
Wow.
And then her brother Caden is about to turn 3, and she has a younger sister about to turn 2. So they're very busy.
Mm-hmm.
And then my daughter Morgan, another Alabama grad, lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Actually lives in Ypsilanti, Michigan, near Ann Arbor. Her husband is a Michigan grad. They met at Disney World, at the Disney. They were both interns at Disney.
Oh.
So they have a program for that, and that's where they met. And so they live up there now. And my son Jake, who is also an Alabama grad, lives in Houston. He works for Argus, specifically the Argus News Service. Argus deals in commodities, so he writes articles about different types of commodities or the things that make the commodities. So he might not write on plastic, but he writes on the ingredients that go into plastic in words I can't even pronounce. So
Right.
so they're all great, doing well, and
Yes.
we get to see them often, even the ones that are far away, because, if you ask me what my greatest blessing is, it's that my kids still want to come home.
Yes, absolutely.
So so we have them a lot, and we love that, and love getting together as a family.
How many grandkids now?
3
3. Okay.
grandkids. So
That's very
see what
exciting.
happens in the future.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
no, I don't think so.
All
I
right.
think we've covered it all, and I really appreciate you having me back. To
Oh,
take
my
care of
pleasure.
some
My
of these
pleasure.
Holes in the story. That I sat back and I cannot believe,
Right.
as I was reviewing the first part, I didn't say anything about being in Scouts,
Right.
because that's a pretty important part of your life, and it's a great personal achievement. I have to say that, but it's great. What's greater about it is what it teaches you and what stays with you, even to this day.
And being the director of Air Force Public Affairs at the Pentagon is nothing to sneeze at either.
Nothing to sneeze at either, and
Right.
it's a pretty incredible thing for a little kid from Southeast Alabama to be doing that. So,
Right. Well, thanks again for coming back.
Thanks
I really
a lot.
Appreciate it. Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it, Joe. Appreciate this program and what you all do to keep the legacy of veterans alive.
Thank you.